You're listening to the Cash Podcast, creating affluence, success, and happiness with your financial surgeon, Adam Koós, President and Portfolio Manager at Libertas Wealth Management Group at libertaswealth.com.
Hello, everyone, and happy Friday. Today, we are going to be talking directly to those of you who have kids that are going to college someday, whether that's, a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, it doesn't really matter. But we're going to be talking about financial aid, the FAFSA. We're going to dispel some myths, share some tips and tricks. But before I introduce who I'm going to be sharing all this with and really who has all the expertise today, as always, a few housekeeping items. If this is your first time listening or watching, thank you so much for joining us. The Cash Podcast is produced weekly, and as stated in the intro, Cash stands for creating affluence, success, and happiness, and that's my mission. I want everyone who's watching or listening to learn a little bit more on every episode so you become a little bit more educated every time you finish watching or listening. If you're on iTunes, then feel free to check us out there. If you'd like to subscribe on YouTube, there won't be any visuals or charts today, so you don't need to worry about that. But in the future, and if you'd like to look at other past information, all educational links, visuals, charts, and other resources available on our website at libertaswealth.com. So let's go ahead and get into intros here. I'd like to introduce Amber Gilsdorf officially. She is a college planning consultant at Estrela Consulting, and she's helped many families navigate the college admissions landscape, which is not an easy one, covering topics ranging from highly selective admissions to programs for students with learning disabilities and everything in between. During her time in a past life as a school counselor, Amber conducted countless college planning meetings with families and students. She implemented a countywide college fair, and she was actually selected as the county's You Make a Difference Award. She earned her college counseling certificate from the University of California, Los Angeles back in 2014, which she served to deepen her love for guiding families and students through the college search and application process. She earned her Bachelor's of Arts in American Culture Studies from Bowling Green State University right here in Ohio, and her Master's degree in School Counseling from the Ohio State University. She's a professional member of the Ohio School Counselors Association, the OSCA, and an associate member of the Independent Educational Consultants Association, IECA. I can't believe I said that so well. I thought for sure I'd trip over myself here. In addition, Amber has presented at many, many conferences on topics related to improving the college search process for students, which is one of the most important things, I think. She also has conducted annual guest lectures at classes within the Ohio State University's Counselor Education Program, and she sat on the advisory board for Otterbein University here in Columbus, Ohio. She lives in Central Ohio with her husband, 6-year-old son, and twin black cats. When she's not hanging out with her family or supporting the students that she works with, she reads prolifically and indulges in her love of football, movies, and her other favorite animal, wait for it, the llama. So thank you so much for joining us. I love it.
Well, thank you for having me.
Oh, all right. Well, let's just go ahead and jump right into the meat of the conversation here. Tell me, there's so much to talk about. We honestly don't even have enough time today to go over everything we could talk about. But let's try to hit the main points. I mean, what are your thoughts, just in general, on, say, helping my child or any kid figure out what they want to do for a living? Or is that even the right question I should be asking?
It's a fair question. It's a very common question. My number one piece of advice for families when I start with them and when I start with their students is for the student to know, like that old adage, know thyself. So the time in high school or even middle school is to get to know yourself and to explore. So using that 9 through 12 experience to embrace both of those philosophies. And under the know thyself mantra, especially for teenagers, is a necessity that they explore their aptitudes or strengths, their interests, and understanding their personality type. When those three areas, aptitude, strengths, interests, and personality, intersect, that's where a student is going to find the highest level of satisfaction on a career path. And there's a couple resources and tools I point families to use. Some are low cost or free. There's a tool called U-Science that assesses aptitudes and interests and personality all together and provides
U-Science, like Y-O-U and then science?
You, yeah, like you, the science of U-Science.
Yeah.
And then that one is About $25 for a student to use, but well worth its weight in gold, in my opinion. And then another one that's free is actually run by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it's called My Next Move. And it's fairly intuitive and student friendly, and that one is free. And both of these assessments will spit out a career possibilities list at the end. This is by no means gospel or the things that students have to do with their lives, but it gives them a jumping off point. And then from those jumping off points, students should engage with every opportunity they can for volunteering or related extracurricular opportunities, job shadowing, internships, volunteer experiences, summer programs, anything that's remotely linked to or related to that list of careers, especially the ones that they find themselves drawn to. I've taken these assessments myself, and over again, I get, college professor, counselor, educator, and if I were at this moment, 16 years old, I would be talking to my school counselor or an area counselor,
Nice.
and finding out what their daily activities are like, what's their job like. So all that to sum up, the biggest goal for students in high school, unless they are the rare exception that knows exactly what they want to do and has known what they want to do, that's an exception. The best thing a student can do for themselves is to have a handful of things that they think they might want to pursue in college. They don't have to have one, and their career path won't be one thing. It will evolve and change. So having a couple things they want to explore in college is the goal.
That makes sense. You actually already answered one of my other kind of sub questions here to that same question, which is, this isn't probably going to give you the career that you're going to go down. It's not like an arranged marriage, obviously.
No. And in fact, I imagine that wouldn't be a terribly successful approach to pick one and stick with one.
Probably
But
not.
be open to exploring, but exploring within the realm of interests, personality, and strengths.
When you and I first started talking about doing this podcast together, one of the things you mentioned to me that really stuck out was you said that financial aid, getting into the money side of this, you said financial aid is completely misunderstood, and I can't forget it. It's almost like it's stuck in my brain. Tell me what you meant by that.
What I meant is that over the years, I've found people throw financial aid around as a term quite loosely. They're like, oh, financial aid, that'll help us pay for college, but they don't necessarily understand what it means. So I think of financial aid as the umbrella. Picture an umbrella.
Okay.
One of those huge golf ones. And financial aid is defined broadly as any money that can help pay for college. But it's not all free money. This is where I think families get confused. They just think, oh, financial aid, it'll help us pay for college. But free money is the kind of money that you get in a birthday card and you don't have to give it back. So free money is my favorite kind of money. And free money can come in the form of scholarships, grants, sort of a work study. That's more of a sidebar thing that we won't get into today. But also it can come in the form of loans. And we all know loans have to be paid back. So financial aid can encompass all of those things.
Okay. And what about you had mentioned also merit aid.
Oh, yes. So merit aid, so go back to our umbrella visual.
Yeah.
And we've got the big golf umbrella. Financial aid is any money that can help pay for college. Now picture the handle of the golf umbrella. On one side of the handle, there's a column called merit-based aid. And then on the other side is need-based aid. So merit-based aid, I always tell students, like, think about maybe Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts and you earn merit badges. Merit is money from colleges or other organizations or scholarship corporations, money for being awesome. You're awesome at something. You're awesome at school. You're awesome at athletics. You're awesome at your extracurriculars. You're awesome in some way. That's merit aid. Need-based aid is money that you get for having financial need, and it's typically based on family income and assets.
Okay. I got you. So what are some of the strategies that maybe somebody might use? And I'm sure this is a common question because I get it sometimes and I don't do what you do for a living, but what are some strategies people could use to get that merit aid? I mean, does it make sense to go out and spend, 3 weeks of the summer every day, 8 hours a day, applying to 7,000 scholarships?
People
Maybe it
have
does.
done that. I don't know if it makes a lot of sense. And so there's kind of two questions in there that I'll address. Does it make sense to apply to 1 million scholarships and spend 8 hours a day? Maybe for some students, but I have not seen, by and large, students have great success with applying to scholarships that are maybe open nationally. So you're talking about students from all over the country competing for maybe one scholarship award.
Right.
That's a huge competition pool. Instead, when we're talking about scholarships, merit-based aid, free money, I encourage families to look locally, regionally, or statewide. Then you're dealing with a much smaller competition pool. And these are for outside scholarships. There's kind of two types of scholarships. You have outside scholarships, which can come from, your local Kiwanis club or your Rotary, or a lot of churches or faith-based organizations will give out scholarships. And then you also have institutional scholarships that can come directly from the college or university itself. Mm-hmm. This is where a majority of merit aid comes from for students. It's a common misnomer. Families think, we got to apply to 9,000 private scholarships and maybe we'll get one.
Right.
Instead, being intentional about the schools to which a student applies is going to be the number one most useful strategy for securing merit-based aid.
Okay.
So what I mean by that is it's very common for students to have maybe pie in the sky, like, I want to apply to, Northwestern and Vanderbilt and these big ticket, hot.
Right. Big names.
And if you have the GPA and the test scores and the competitive profile to be admissible there, good for you. But those schools don't give a lot of merit-based aid, and everyone competing for admission to that school is equally as competitive. Instead, a strategy—
Supply and demand, right?
Exactly. Instead, a strategy families may find more useful in wielding scholarship results would be to have a majority of the schools on a student's list that are where the student is in the higher, like top 25% of applicants. So their GPA and test scores are higher than the majority of students who apply to that school. That automatically launches them into a really small competitive pool for some of those big ticket university scholarships. And
that makes sense.
Yeah, and making sure that the list that the student applies to, that they actually give merit-based aid. A quick search of this financial aid website is going to tell you pretty quick if they even give out scholarships. Like I just mentioned, Northwestern, Vanderbilt, they don't give a ton, if any.
Right.
And all it takes is going to the financial aid website to see that.
Pretty honest about it, huh?
Yeah.
Well, what about the needs side of the equation? I mean, what about needs-based aid? What are the strategies there?
This one's a little trickier, and I always encourage families to navigate this one with caution. And by caution, I mean working with a financial advisor like yourself, especially if it's a family that traditionally wouldn't qualify. And what I mean by that is, I've worked with some families where their annual gross income is $400,000 a year. That's going to be a pretty big stretch to qualify for any kind of need-based aid. Strategies that families could employ would be to minimize cash on hand in the year prior to completing financial aid applications. So I've had families that might pay off their mortgage or put a lot of assets into retirement accounts, which are not factored in on the financial aid applications. Again, exercise with caution. I would never pretend to have the expertise to tell a family like,
no, that all makes sense though.
Do an IRA, it'll be great. Like, you live and you still need to have an income. So I always tell families that you want to use this one with caution. However, minimizing cash on hand could be one strategy. Another one is to avoid having too many assets in a student's name. Now, the student could be the beneficiary, for example, a 529 plan.
529 plan,
Is the custodian, but then the student benefits. That is fine. But for example, if there's like a trust in a student's name, or if a student has like a huge savings account in their name, it's not the most advisable approach because that gets counted against them in the application for financial aid.
For their personal application. So so FAFSA is going to look less favorably on a student that's got 30 grand in the bank versus even if the parents do well.
Yes.
As opposed to a kid that has zero in the bank.
Yes. So the FAFSA or even the CSS profile, which is a much more less commonly used financial aid application, both of those applications assume that students they're not paying bills, they don't have overhead, they're not maybe saving retirement, although it would be wise to do so, young students. However, they're assuming that the student can use that cash on hand for themselves, and that asset is assessed at a much higher rate in those applications.
Yeah, and if the kid has 30 grand in the bank that a bunch of family members have saved over the years, that could be 1 year of college, and the university is going to look and go, they're okay.
Yep. So the other strategy for need-based aid, and this one would only be if you are the parent of a student who is, extraordinarily competitive academic, GPA and test scores. If a family does have their student apply to like a Harvard or a Yale or these schools that have incredible endowments where they could fund every student that goes there fully 3 times over, a family that makes $250,000 a year could still qualify for need-based aid at some of those schools. Now, that is by and large an exception.
Probably rare, yeah.
Yeah, but if you're listening and you're a family where that's the case with your student, like you may qualify for some need-based aid at those schools, and it'd be worth it to have your student apply.
Well, I'm sure you've worked with enough families to where at this point you could probably easily say, look, this is the benchmark. Here's the Gaussian bell curve. Your student probably falls, close enough to where it's worth the gamble to go that route. Okay, now that makes sense. Another myth that you would mention is families who feel like they'll never qualify for financial aid. They just kind of almost think they've given up before they started. So they just decide not to even fill out the FAFSA. What would you say to those people?
I would say, stop, don't do that. So we just had talked about like a benchmark maybe. And even though, yes, that may be true for need-based aid, there may be a benchmark. If a family has any intention whatsoever of possibly funding their child's college education with loans, even if it's a small amount of loans, the best type of loan that they could get would be a federal unsubsidized loan. Federal loans generally have lower interest rates. They tend to be fixed. They aren't fluctuating with the market. They have better repayment terms. So let's say I'm a family where I make $1 million and I know that, we're not going to qualify for need-based aid. Why bother filling out the FAFSA? But I also have a financing strategy where maybe that $1 million is tied up elsewhere and we can't necessarily pay for the entire cost of attendance for a year of college by check. So I know my child's going to need some small amount of loans. That federal unsubsidized loan, I can't even qualify to take that out if I don't complete the FAFSA. So families think they might want to use a little bit of loan money to help their child finance college. You've got to fill out the FAFSA to even have access to the best loan out there. Now, I hate loans in general.
Of course, yeah.
If you need them, that's
it's good to have them as a B plan.
Yes,
and most people use them.
If you don't have the ticket, so you need FAFSA for that.
Well, and then if you if they itemize on their taxes, they can be tax deductible. The rates, like you said, are typically much lower. So, on a Parent Plus loan, let's just say a private loan, they're going to pay 5, 6, 7. I've seen 8%, which is not tax deductible, by the way. So it's almost like, even if you don't need the money, sometimes it makes sense to go ahead and use it just because there's other things you can do with your money elsewhere for the time being till the student graduates. Then maybe someday down the road, they've done well, they've got a great career. And if you have the cash on hand and you want to, as a graduation gift or a wedding gift, pay off that loan later, go for it, or half the loan or something like that. That makes sense.
Yep. But you need the FAFSA to access that loan.
And I'm assuming you forfeit if you don't fill out the FAFSA in a year. I'm assuming you have to wait for the next year, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. I wasn't sure. And speaking of the FAFSA, I mean, what are some of the components of filling out just college applications in general? You mentioned another one.
Yes. So there are many pieces and parts. We have this maybe old-fashioned mindset that the college application is this paper thing that we put in an envelope with all our materials and we mail off to college. And that's not true. There's a lot of moving parts to the application. So I like to think of it in terms of who the responsibility falls upon for each part. And that helps break down what the pieces are. So we have student, counselor, and teacher. So we'll say school, student, school, and parents. These are the three main players in one application. So the student is responsible for completing the online, everything's online now, the online application for the college. So the student, if they're applying to 5 colleges, they're responsible for completing the online application. And the parent typically is responsible for helping the student pay the application fee. The student is also responsible for taking the ACT or SAT. We'll talk a little bit about testing, I think, in the remainder of this podcast, but for our purposes right now, the student is responsible for testing. And then the parent helps pay for the student to send their score reports to schools. So student, testing, and application. Okay. Then the counselor is responsible for sending a letter of recommendation and the transcript from the high school. And the counselor usually works with the teacher to also send in any teacher letters. Okay. So you have student responsibilities and your counselor/teacher responsibilities, or the school. And then the parent, as I said, they're kind of a background player helping pay for all of the various fees that come with this process. And then their big role, the parent's big role, is to complete that FAFSA that we just talked about, the free application for federal student aid. And if required by the college, not every college requires it, also the CSS profile. And that is a more intensive deep dive look at a family's finances that the institution uses. So like I mentioned, Harvard and Yale earlier.
Okay, I was going to ask who requires that.
Yes. The general rule of thumb is the more selective the school, the higher the likelihood they're going to require the CSS profile, because what they're trying to do is assess, everything from, the CSS profile asks questions about even medical expenses or dependents that, like I had a student one year whose family helped care for an elderly grandparent that lived with them. Okay. So things that, it's hard to assess on a FAFSA. So it's a much more detailed form that helps institutions make financial aid decisions, not if you qualify for federal government money, but rather institutional money.
Got it. Okay. And then you kind of mentioned the 3-legged stool there with, the student, the parent, the counselor. My kids are a little young yet. My older son just turned 11 2 days ago. And my other son, thank you. And my other son turns 8 this summer. So, but at a certain point, I think when they turn 14, 15, when they hit that freshman, sophomore-ish area, I see a lot of value in what you do at Estrela in helping. I'm assuming add a 4th leg to the stool. Can you talk about where you fit in, what you do, and how you help students? Because I think it's wonderful. I know we'll be using you.
Thank you. I had not actually thought about it as a stool.
No, it's a stool.
I suppose a 4-legged stool is much more sturdy than
a little bit, yeah.
So my role, I tell families often that I pick up where the school leaves off. So in no way am I replacing the very good work that counselors do. As you mentioned in my introduction, I am a former school counselor. I know how hard they work and how earnest their intentions and how good their hearts are. I also know how large their student caseloads are. And in my realm now, on the private side of things, I have a very small caseload. I keep maybe 20 students, so 20 families at a time that I work with. And it's much more personalized. Counselors have to take, just by nature of the job, a much more one size fits all measure. And maybe it's not fair to say one size fits all, but they have to have maybe a handful of like standard sizes that
Sure, like processes, systems.
Correct. And where I am much more individualized in my work. So if a student is specifically interested in schools that have an accelerated bachelor's to a Juris Doctorate degree to become a lawyer, I'm helping them find those schools. And if they also want to make sure that school has a top, debate team or mock trial team, we're getting into the nitty gritty with the specifics for a student. And then we're also accounting for the very granular specifics of a family's priorities as well. So if a family says we have a budget of $35,000 a year that we can pay out of pocket for our students, then I'm working to make sure that at least a majority of the schools on that student's list that they'll ultimately apply to fit within the family's priorities as well as the student.
Okay, got it. And I'm assuming that you probably do get busy, and at a certain point the caseload gets full. And I would assume there'd be other people on your team that would
Yep.
work, that do the same thing you do. I know I've met one of them.
Yes. There's 8 consultants on our team, and we're based, we can meet with students. I have some clients that are in Florida, so
Okay,
location isn't really an issue whatsoever.
right. Especially these days.
Oh, yeah.
Here we are doing an interview on a Zoom call, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to kind of throw that in there, but I was just curious, what if, going back to you mentioned ACTs, SATs, what if my student isn't the best test taker? And I'm going to I have to throw this joke in there. One of my favorite comedians, he always said that, when people say, oh, I'm really, I do well in school. I'm just really bad test taker. And he said, so you're bad at the part where we find out how much you know. And it's so horrible, but anyway, I digress.
I would add to your favorite comedian, where we find out how much you know in a incredibly pressure cooker time situation.
Thank you for throwing that caveat out there, because now the comedian should just feel bad now, right?
Whoever it is.
So let's just say they're a bad test taker. Is this something that, I don't know, they could strategically take advantage of? You'd mentioned a website, I think.
Yeah. So strategically taking advantage of is always full of caveats, because testing, ACT and SAT largely, has been a huge part of the college application process for almost a century. That being said, COVID has certainly thrown a wrench into if schools are even going to require ACT or SAT.
Really?
Oh, yes. So that is we'll put that aside for a second. I will come back to that. In typical times, in pre-COVID times, if a student was not the world's greatest test taker, then there are a list of schools that actually don't require ACT or SAT at all for admission. And that school is maintained by a nonprofit organization. That list is maintained by a nonprofit organization called fairtest.org. So fair, like all is fair and admissions. I don't know. It's not actually. Fair Test, FAIR test.org. And they have a whole list of schools that are test optional for admission. So students have the choice to submit test scores or not. And this would have been in any given normal year. Now that COVID has entered the scene, schools have had to rethink how they use testing in admissions, because so many test centers, just because in Ohio we have test centers that are functioning normally, there are states right now like Michigan, or for a while California, where not a single test center could be operational for ACT or SAT. So how do you account for what if a student from Ohio can apply with test scores, but a student from California can't?
Right.
Your best bet is to do away with it altogether. So for the first time ever, colleges, this last application cycle, this year's current seniors, most seniors did not have to submit test scores to any college or university for admission. Yeah. So students around the world who are not the world's greatest test takers rejoice.
It's a new playing field. Yeah.
It is. And like all new playing fields, there are some, or like all new frontiers, there have been some hiccups and some
of course
unforeseen things that they've had to navigate. But that would be an option for students who aren't the best test taker. Now, that doesn't mean, oh, I'm not the best test taker, so I shouldn't even try. Because
Right.
here's the fine print and here's the catch. Some schools, let's say they do go back to requiring test scores, or maybe they don't require test scores for admission. They may still require them for those merit scholarships we talked about earlier.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So, or for placement into freshman level courses. So, yeah, we don't need your test score, Adam, to admit you, but we need to see your testing to know what level math class we should put you in as a freshman in college.
Okay.
So it's still worth a student's time and energy to prep and to test, and to try to test more than once, because
That's good advice.
Students do better the second time than they do the first time. And then usually after 3 times, they kind of plateau, but putting some energy and time into test prep is also a worthwhile venture.
Okay, that's interesting. I think back to, when I graduated from college, roughly 120 years ago, and I took the SAT one time, applied to one school. It was just such a different time back then. These days, I know that I wonder what's going to happen to the Prometrics and the Pearsons of the world, because I know these days they're starting this whole online proctor thing where you've got a proctor watching your screen from, halfway around the world. And they make you, take your camera and look around the environment. And then, you're watching your screen. It's being recorded. If you hit certain keys, then you get flagged. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what happens going forward. But they're just like shifting a car back when I graduated from high school. You also used to have to shift cars, and you'd have to put the clutch in and you have to slow down before you go in the next gear. And I think that's probably where we are right now, is transitioning to that next frontier.
Yes, it feels very much like we're on the cusp of something, and to be actively working in the field at this moment. I mean, everything's been affected by COVID, but in my little corner of the world, it's quite an interesting view.
Well, I know that I said at the very beginning that there's not even enough time to go into all the things that we'd like to talk about today. And that's why we'll probably be doing another one of these maybe this summer before school starts. But and this is going to be a long answer, I'm sure, but one of the things I know that you do is you take in your working with the child, the family, consulting with them over a period of time. And I don't want to say in the end, but, as a figure of speech, in the end, how do you build the list, the college list that you recommend? And it's not one, obviously, it's several universities and colleges, but how do you build that list in a mindful manner, keeping in mind GPA, test scores, financial aid being provided by the schools in question, and so on, based on the child in question? And again, like I said, I don't expect you to give all the answers, but that's I think one of the biggest golden nuggets here.
Yes. Research, intensive loads of research that you can't even fathom. And I think at the end, that's really the value added of why families really appreciate our partnership, or what my colleagues bring to the table is, while their student is at school all day doing their, 8 periods of classes, I am working diligently on researching the schools that I think could be a good fit. So I spend a lot of time at the beginning of my work with a new family, finding out. Actually have a 6-page questionnaire that I have parents do to understand their priorities for their child. And then I spend a lot of one-on-one time over Zoom talking with their student to find out what their priorities are. And also back to that adage of know thyself, I also want to know themselves. I want to learn about them and their aptitudes and strengths and career interests. And I help them set up job shadows and informational interviews and summer programs to gain hands-on experience. And then we're constantly dialoguing about and reflecting upon and unpacking their thoughts and feelings on everything all the new stimulus that they're taking in. And then taking what I know of the student, what I know of the parents' priorities, I use a host of resources in my research. So I have books, a couple nuggets that I love. I use the FISC Guide, which provides a qualitative profile of schools, like a write-up that makes you feel like you're talking to a friend over coffee about a school.
And how do you spell that? The website, what's it called?
FISK, Fiske, and it's not a website. It's a book. They publish, it's huge. They publish a new one every year, and it's edited and added to by various professionals in the field every year. So I use the FISK Guide. We have a college search database that, my company, we pay for, that has a lot of bells and whistles. So I use that. I look deeply into one of my favorite tools is collegedata.com.
Okay.
And it's free, but you have to make a profile. And then they pull from something called the common data set. Don't even worry about that because it's very confusing and a lot to dig through. But college data pulls from all kinds of data points for every school that tells you what percentage of students at that school get need-based aid, what percentage get merit aid, and then the average amount of merit aid, the average amount of financial need-based aid, and then yes. And then if a family says scholarships are really important to us, then I know I'm going to be using collegedata.com to figure out, okay, I know they want a small school. I know they want a small school on the East Coast that is really strong in maybe neuroscience and has a commitment to sustainability and also has summer co-op programs and maybe this opportunity to do a semester in Washington, D.C. And then I'm building that list with a mindset of what percentage of those students are getting merit aid, because this family won't likely qualify for need-based aid. So what percent are getting merit aid and how much on average are they getting? So I'm kind of helping the family figure out what they can expect their total out-of-pocket costs to be. And then in addition to that, I'm looking at the student's priorities. And let's say the student is 3.5 GPA, so solid, an A student, with a 29 ACT. I'm making sure that that list, maybe I'm targeting about 8 schools. I want to make sure that a majority of schools on that list are target schools. So schools where that student's 3.5 and 29 ACT are right smack in the middle of the middle 50% typically admitted to that school. So most of the schools on the list, that student is going to be right in the middle of that 50%. And so then we know they're pretty competitive. Yeah. And then have a couple schools on that list where the students 3.5 GPA and 29 are well above the average admitted GPA and student. That's where merit money will absolutely come from.
The supply and demand again,
And then I will have 1 or 2 schools as well that we would call stretch schools or reach schools, where maybe they're the students like dream school or a big ticket school, but maybe the GPA or test score are a little bit lower than the average admitted student at that school, but it still might be worth a shot. And then from there, once the list is crafted, we work pretty much very intensively on completing the college essay and the application together. The student does all of the work, and then I'm kind of providing as a sounding board review of their essay and edits, helping them put together their application so that it's most impressively representative of that student.
Really drilling down into the right schools and focusing on those right schools to provide the best aid and opportunity for admission. That's great.
Yeah.
Something else you said in there too that I just thought of this is we haven't hired interns in years. It's just in our business, in our industry, it's really tough sometimes to hire interns. But one thing that I do, I don't want to say all the time, but at least once every 3 to 4 months, I'll have some very, very ambitious child come out and email me or email the office at our info at mailbox, and they'll say, hey, here's my resume, I'd love to talk. And we won't offer an internship, but I'll spend a half day with them just hanging out, or we'll let them shadow me for a day or something like that. And there's not enough kids that do that, I don't think. And not only would it help them not only would it help them understand businesses better, and then businesses understand them that might be hiring someday, but I almost think the more important benefit to doing that is finding out whether or not when you're shadowing somebody, if I thought this was one thing and it's something completely different and it's horrible and I would never want to do this. And I'm sure that happens more times than not.
Yes, I always tell students, you're not going to wake up one morning and the clouds part and you suddenly are like,
angels sing.
what are you going to do? You have to happen to your life. You can't let your life happen to you.
Yeah, that's a good quote. I like it. Well, tell me how can people get a hold of you if they want help, if they have questions? What are the best ways to get a hold of you?
In this day and age, email is awesome. So my email is Amber at Estrela, and it's 1L, Estrela consulting.com. And then Estrela Consulting is our website. If you just Google us, we're the first one that pops up. And we have some free resources there. Actually, on the very top banner, we've put together a special site with our webpage that has resources for COVID era college searching. And then, of course, all of our profiles of myself and all my colleagues are linked right off of the website as well. So you can find me that way also.
Okay.
And we have a newsletter if people want to sign up.
I'll put your contact information, or we will, at the bottom of the YouTube page. And of course, if anybody wants to contact us and wants your contact information, we'll just send them right along to you. But I think we'll stop for today, and we'll pick this back up again in summer or the next time we do one of these, because I think there's more to share. But thank you so much for doing this and being willing to come on. I appreciate it.
It is my true pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
No, you're welcome. Well, that's it for today's show. Feel free to share this episode with your friends and family. If you'd like to discuss your personal situation further, again, we're going to have Amber's information at the bottom of the YouTube page in the text area. You can also reach out to us and let us know. We'll pass your information on to her, or vice versa, or just introduce the two of you through email. Remember that you never, ever have to be a client to ask a question. As far as we are concerned over here at Libertas Wealth Management Group, obviously financial planning, retirement planning, estate planning, and investment management. If you'd like to set up an introduction call or Zoom meeting, just head over to our website at libertaswealth.com on the contact page, where you can get access to our calendar there. As I always say, there are thousands and thousands of podcasts out there these days, and you chose to give ours a listen today. So thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and YouTube. And remember, you can sign up at libertaswealth.com to get not only these updates, but as well as other screencast videos and articles delivered directly to your email inbox. Feel free to follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Libertas Wealth. I'm also on Twitter at Adam Koós and on Instagram at Financial Surgeon. So thank you again so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Cash Podcast with your financial surgeon, Adam Koós. To see any charts or images that were mentioned in this show, or to check out additional articles, videos, and other educational resources, head over to libertaswealth.com.